Good morning, I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Today we are in conversation with Mark Winzar, hope I pronounced that right. He's a Senior Vice President for Business Development for lots of different countries. I'm going to let him explain that at Jet Support Services, or JSSI. Mark, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Hey Matt, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you on a grey and cold winter's morning in the UK. But absolute pleasure to join you. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've got a lovely backdrop behind you there. I see the Christmas tree and everything. First thing, tell us about, first of all, your position. Tell us about JSSI. Any Google search and everything else is going to tell us your MRO programs, services. But you also, the company also produces a really excellent, I looked at the index, you produce a Business Aviation Index. Give us sort of the 50 cent or the 50 pence tour of the company, the main areas of business, and I think you joined in 2009 and helped set up shop in Hong Kong.
Sure, I did. Yeah, you're right. I joined in 2009. JSSI is a very different company then to what it is now. I joined as a technical advisor. And now Senior Vice President of Business Development for pretty much everything outside of the Americas. So the Europe, Middle East, Africa and APAC regions fall under my umbrella for business development. So yeah, joined as a technical advisor, one of probably about 30 at the time, and then worked my way through to become Vice President of Technical Services in 2014. 6 years in that, and then about a year ago come over to the business development side, and really enjoying the challenge. And let me tell you, it has been a challenge this year.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the company itself. I mean, is it mainly MRO? Is it services? What is the company doing?
So the core business is hourly cost maintenance programs. So programs that protect against unscheduled events and cover your scheduled events. Predominantly on engines. We have about 2,000 aircraft on the program, about 4,300 assets. The majority of what we do is engine program coverage, but we also do airframes and APUs. So that's our core business. Over the last few years, we've certainly diversified. In 2015, we started our parts standalone business, parts procurement business. Firstly, it was a natural progression. Firstly, to be able to supply parts for the maintenance events that we manage, of which historically there's probably 10,000 or so a year, including 200 or 300 major off-wing engine events. And that business has grown through to third-party business now as well, selling parts to customers who aren't necessarily on our programs, but still want that aftermarket support. And over the last few years, we've diversified even further into areas where we're supplying a lot more information and data to the markets through Conklin and Deca, a name that probably everyone knows in aviation, that's helping customers evaluate costs, performance data, finance and tax planning, everything about owning and operating an aircraft. And last year we acquired Trackware, which is an MRO software package for the maintenance companies. Helps them run their business, everything through their material planning, their invoicing, managing the approvals, issuing the certificates, everything that you'd want from an MRO software package. So a very diverse company now.
Let's get to the heart of things. COVID-19, it's decimated commercial aviation, especially the international side of the equation. We've got some commercial traffic coming back in China. Indonesia is kind of a mixed bag. South Korea's okay. It was for a while. Now they've had some cases come back up. But it's had sort of a mixed effect on business aviation from the people I talked to. I talked to Metrojet in Hong Kong, Jet Aviation, and some other people. First quarter was pretty good. Then things shut down as countries closed their borders. People were trying to figure out where they're going to park their aircraft. What are they going to do with MRO? what has been your perspective as sort of as, let's say, from March, I guess, when things really hit? What has been sort of the progressive effect on business aviation?
So the first quarter, as you say, was a hugely successful quarter. On the back of last year we saw record flight hours. That kind of progressed into the first quarter. And then as we hit the second half of February, COVID took a global stranglehold on everything. And March and April saw flight hours just literally fall off a cliff. We saw a 75% reduction in flight hours. There is another way of looking at that, though, Matt. I mean, commercial aviation has been decimated, but what we saw was, 1 in 4 of our our customers' flights were actually still taking place. We have a diverse business. There was a lot of we have helicopters that were doing emergency work. Business aviation lent itself to the COVID kind of, let's call it, relief cause as well, through maybe medical flights or repatriating people or flying supplies into places that needed it. It took a hit. It took a massive hit for the best part of 2 or 3 months. That was globally as well. Our fleet of 2,000 aircraft is spread right across the globe, so we have a good handle on what's going on. Some places were hit harder than others, but pretty much everyone took a real massive hit. Since then, the summer months definitely saw a climb back in hours, and we got up to about a 23-24% shortfall. And the last couple of months have seen that just dip slightly as we've gone into the autumn and the winter, which I think was expected. But certainly the end of the year will end up, at least 25-26% down on what we were year on year. There is green shoots of recovery, but it's been a very, very tough year for business aviation without a shadow of a doubt. And not just in terms of flight hours, but for everything that goes around it in terms of the infrastructure.
Right. What about, and let's talk about that. You've got, I'm always curious because if I was a billionaire and I had a Gulfstream or a Global 7500 or whatever, it's not a matter of not being able to fly. It's a matter of, I could fly, but I can't get through quarantine, or I've got to stay in quarantine for 2 weeks. Exactly. If I'm a lessor, I can't repossess this airplane because I can't get my people over there. If I need to do MRO, I can't get my technician. If the plane is in some other location, I can't get my technicians in there to do the scheduled MRO things. Or if I'm just storing the plane, what am I going to do with that? How hard is it to, and also there's been, not just in commercial aviation, but also business aviation, people have had to conserve cash, cut costs. So, a lot of people are being let go. I don't have the exact figures in business aviation, but does the industry face a shortage of qualified technicians? And how hard is it going to be to bring some of these planes that have been stored out of storage?
So touching on that subject first, that's a really interesting point. I think that the MRO space and the engineering space in aviation in general has struggled for a number of years now to attract new people and new talent, and COVID has certainly kind of like accelerated that. What it's meant is that some really experienced technicians have fallen by the wayside, purely because people have had to cut their cloth accordingly, as you've just said. And that's going to be really tough to bring back. Some places, some mature markets like the US and Europe, I think the diversification of the amount of MRO that are in region, I think is going to make it a lot less painful. And certainly in the US, you were able to move around, a little bit more easier, for example, than you were in Europe, and certainly in places like Australia, where you were stuck in your own state where you couldn't get out. And in Hong Kong, all the aircraft were parked. It's difficult to get people in to do the maintenance. So it has been a really challenging time and will continue to be so, not least because MROs are going to feel the pressure. They're certainly going to feel the pressure of having lost some really skillful and experienced people. But that's something that we're going to have to cope with, and we're going to have to build up. And I do start to see it happening. I am seeing people in the engine shops coming back into work, right, which I think is hugely important. And as we start seeing more and more maintenance events happening, we will bring people back. But that doesn't hide the problem, right, that there is a shortage of talent anyway. Right? We need to bring that back into this industry.
Well, it's very, very interesting because when you could still go to trade shows, and there were lots of trade shows here
in the old days,
in the good old days, which does seem like a long time ago. But I was at the I forget what it was. It was one of the training trade shows here in Singapore, and people were desperately talking about how do you attract young people today to get into the industry, and whether it's on the MRO side or, they talked about, okay, everybody wants to be a pilot, everybody wants to be, cabin crew or whatever. Nobody wants to be a mechanic. Nobody wants to be a grease monkey. They all want to be what I call a software monkey, a code monkey. And it's really hard because, those jobs are pretty good jobs when you're working on a Bombardier aircraft or a Gulfstream or a Dassault. You've got to know your stuff, and they're pretty decent paying jobs. There's not that many people that are in there, and you could have a pretty good career if you stick with it. And my father, for example, worked at the same company for 50 years. And you don't see that much these days. No. But there are lots of good jobs in that industry. But how do you attract people to that? That's a good point you brought up.
Yes, look, it's a tough question. I think, I go back to when I started in aviation as a 16-year-old, and as you say, turning spanners. And that's what we learned. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to be engineers. Look, there's always going to be the need for having to turn spanners and physically work on an aircraft. But look, this whole market is changing. The way that we understand how an aircraft operates and the data that we collect to be able to analyze the performance of an aircraft, that's becoming more and more sophisticated, and it's becoming more and more prevalent now with direct reporting from the cockpit into engine health monitoring and other parts of the business, and I think that's one area where we might be able to like attract the younger people. You mentioned earlier they're into data, they're into computer software as opposed to turning spanners. So I think we've got to try and get that balance in. How do you take the information that we're gathering from the technology that is coming into the aviation market and turn that into the MRO space, right? And mix the two. If we can make that like sexy again, let's call it that, then I think there's an opportunity to bring new talent into the marketplace.
Yeah, somebody's got to change the hydraulic oil once in a while, though.
You're never going to get away from that, right? You're never going to get away from that. But doing it through maybe some kind of like data collation, right? And the way that you're reading and doing maintenance that's actually the aircraft is telling you is needs doing, rather than kind of like just working through numbers 1 to 10 through a manual. Right, maybe that's the way to attract the younger generation. I don't have the answer. I really don't. But it's just something that is going through my mind. We've got to get younger people into the MRO space.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's talk about the company itself, JSSI.
Sure.
You guys had some big news recently. You joined with a company that they actually took a majority position in the company, GTCR.
Yes.
I've never heard of them before. And then I started doing a little bit of research. None of the financial details were disclosed, so I'm sure you're not going to disclose them.
Correct.
But I'm just curious. Was it time for a lot of times the people who start a business and they grow the business, it's time for them to take a little bit of money off the table. Was this just the right time for the owners to do that? And GTCR, I mean, they were kind of interesting. They're making lots of moves in aviation. They were a big investor in GoGo, but that was recently sold to Intelsat. So can you walk us through a little bit about that? And again, I know you're not going to give us all the dirt, but you know.
Well, it's been an interesting, 6 or 7 weeks for sure. One thing that I can confirm is that our president and CEO Neil Book wasn't looking to, bring investors into the business per se. It wasn't something that he was actively looking at. He has had a relationship with GTCR and many other people over a number of years. They're a Chicago-based private equity firm, so it was a natural type of relationship. And my understanding is that GTCR have definitely seen the steps that JSSI have made consistently over the last few years in our enhanced performance, the way that we're breaking into new markets, we're enhancing our market share, and the customer service that we've given people, and it kind of think it fitted in with their overall values as well. And out of the blue, a discussion took place where it was pretty clear to Neil that working together would probably make us stronger than working apart, shall we say. So a deal was reached. And I'm extremely excited to see this partnership with GTCR come to fruition. They're very experienced in the aviation market. JSSI has made great strides over the last few years, and as I was saying earlier, diversified its business. It will enable us to continue to look at strategic acquisition, not just to enhance our core business and our parts businesses, but also to really enhance our ability to be able to collect data, harvest data, and use that data to be able to drive down costs and improve service for the business aviation market. So a surprise to us all, I think, including Neil, right? But a pleasant surprise, and one that I'm hugely excited about.
Well, it's an early Christmas present, so.
Yeah, look, it's great. I mean, they've got great experience in aviation. We're, I believe, a very unique business, an independent in a sector that's not necessarily like flush with choice, right? So having an independent side of it is I think, is truly key, and our customers want that independence, and so this just makes us stronger to be able to work together and working towards the same value. So I think it's great.
I'm interested. I mean, a lot of the comments that you made are very interesting to me, because I've been covering the industry for about the last 5-6 years now, and at one point it was going gangbusters. Everybody was buying the large scale, big cabin jets. Then COVID came in. We've seen mixed reports, as we mentioned earlier, that people are flying for safety reasons. Instead of flying first class, your team to do a deal, you're going to hire a private jet and try to get in there and try to get past the quarantine and whatever. But what you just said is very interesting to me. Do you see, because of COVID and the effects that it's had on business aviation, do you see some more consolidation, or people I'll give you a commercial example. Rex in Australia is buying and leasing jets and trying to give Virgin and Qantas a run for their money in the domestic market there. I mean, is there something equivalent to that happening in business aviation, where you see a little consolidation going on?
I think there will be consolidation, Matt. I think there's no doubt. It was happening before COVID anyway. All right. I think we saw some of the bigger fleets like the VistaJets and the NetJets and, really growing their fleets. Some of the smaller operators will fall by the wayside, right? I believe that. But there is opportunity in business aviation now, right? We've seen new people come into the market. Part 135 flight hours are definitely up, right? Because people are chartering. The secret for us is how to keep them, right? Is how to keep those people, how to attract them to become owners as well. Now, you mentioned there about gangbusters and new asset types. It poses a question, right? Are the OEMs going to have to think about less about introducing new aircraft, on a regular basis? Are they going to be able to?
Which Deca is doing tomorrow.
Are they going to be able to sell enough new aircraft to be able to justify the R&D costs and everything that goes with a new asset type, or is there going to be some consolidation where okay, let's make the best of what we've actually got. All right, let's keep costs under control. Let's make sure that the market can service what is already there. Let's give the people that are coming into business aviation the best experience to keep them. Let's not give them the excuse to go back to first class. Yeah. So I think there will be consolidation without a shadow of a doubt. And I think what we'll also see is some of the bigger players getting into the smaller jets, the more mid-size and light cabin, and the onesies and twosies will not disappear, they'll always be there, but I think some of the bigger players will get into the later markets as well.
Well, I'm going to skip ahead on my question list because that was something that I wanted to talk about because, again, the last 5 years, everybody in this part of the world in Asia Pacific, they were buying the big cabins. They were buying the big jets. They wanted the flashy, the big jets, where you could get 17, 18 people on board. And even though they weren't flying 17 or 18 people on board, unless it was their families, that's what they wanted. Now it seems like there's been a switch to call it right sizing or whatever you want to call it, but they're saying, okay, we really don't need the 7,500 because we're not doing transcontinental or intercontinental. We're doing, China domestic or within Asia, and we can go with a mid-size cabin. Is that what you see happening here?
Yeah, I think that's definitely happening. Look, there's always going to be people who are going to want the newest, the biggest, the shiniest, all right? And that's great. Go back to my comment earlier, right? Is there going to be enough of that market in volume to justify keep introducing the new aircraft types? I don't know, right? But we're certainly seeing people who would have been in that market come back into the mid-sized jets for sure. Business aviation, one of the things that I don't think we've done very well over the years is promote ourselves as a business aviation tool, right? I think that business aviation perception outside of our industry is that it's a rich man's toy and a rich man's plaything. And China's had an issue with, perception of, people flaunting wealth. And I think that we have to change that as an industry. And we have to work towards making sure that people see it as a valuable tool. If you take Asia, for example, the vast distances that are involved, right, and the commonality of businesses amongst different countries, aviation is a must, right, an absolute must. So let's work towards making sure that business aviation is seen as what it is, an employer of hundreds of thousands of people, something that contributes billions of dollars to economies and is a proper tool, right, to help business operate rather than the perception that it's just a plaything. And if you put that together, I think that people will start working back towards something that's, in your phrase, less flashy. Let's put it that way.
Well, and that's the thing. I'll tell you, I mean, I go to all these conferences and talk to all these different people that are involved in business aviation, from the OEMs to the FOBs and everybody else. And the guys that I forget, I guess it was the car makers that were testifying before U.S. Congress.
Yeah.
And they shot themselves in the foot by flying on their private jets and all that. Yeah. But for the life of me, I do not understand why the business aviation industry cannot market itself better and get over this, because it is a good tool. Yeah, fine. Yes, there are people who are there's the multi-billionaires out there that are super rich and that like to flash it around. But there are also companies that say, look, I'm closing a deal. I'm doing a multi-billion-dollar deal, and I need to take my team of 20 chartered accountants from point A to point B, and we need to have a meeting on the way, and we don't want to have people in the first class cabin hear us talk about it because it's secret, and it would violate securities rules, and it's a proper business tool. And for the life of me, I don't understand why the industry can't market itself better.
I agree. It's something that I believe that we have to work on. I've heard people talk about it, in recent conferences, like I say, in the good old days when we were allowed to go and meet people. But it's something that we've got to do a better job of. I really believe that. Perception is a rich man's plaything, and it's certainly not like that as well. If you look at what business aviation actually provides to the global economy, it is a hugely valuable sector to everybody. There were lots of discussion just a year ago when the UK was having our government elections, about whether business aviation would suffer if one side got in versus the other. And I just found that argument really quite strange, because it boosts the economy so much globally that we need to do a far better job, as you're saying.
Mark, listen, I know your time's valuable, and I don't want to take too much of it. Let me get through a couple of other questions. You guys put out a really interesting index, and I have to say, I just read it for the first time when I was preparing for this interview. The index showed at the end of October, flight hours were actually up from second quarter and third quarter. Q2 to Q3. Do you think that's going to hold up in Q4? And with the latest news about vaccines, and actually the first shot was given to a 90-year-old lady in Great Britain today. The first vaccine shot, apparently, as I saw on the BBC before I came in here. Do you see things getting better sooner rather than later, or are we going to be stuck for a while?
So firstly, on the index is a really interesting tool. I mean, not only does it look at our global fleet, but it also breaks it down into region, and it breaks it down into business sectors as well. So everyone gets a good view of where business aviation is performing, if you like, regionally and sector-wise. And I would encourage everyone to have a look at the market report. It's a really interesting report. In terms of Q3, as I said earlier, we did see Q3 have a nice kind of increase, especially from the summer months. That has dropped slightly, and our prediction as we go into as we calculate November's numbers is that we will probably be about 26% down, a quarter down on where we were this time last year. I actually see that continuing, Matt, until well into 2021. The vaccine is the beginning of the end, right? And there's no doubt about that. But if you look at the huge logistical challenges in making sure that this gets across from a global perspective, not least that, the UK has 60 million people, and then, I don't know how many's in the US, I don't know how many's in Brazil, treble that, I would imagine, if not more. So the logistical challenges of getting the vaccine across the world is going to take a huge amount of time. So whilst the end is at the beginning, I still think we're going to see flight hours probably level where they are now, going well into 21, and hopefully as we get to the end of 21, start pushing up again. That's what I feel.
Okay, a couple of things, and again, I know your time is generous, and I always try to keep these at about 30 minutes, and we're running into that. Quick question. When I was looking at the index, Central and South America had a big increase in flight hours.
Yeah.
Why is that? And then I want to ask you about Asia Pacific, but I have a different question about Asia Pacific. But why Central and South America?
I wouldn't be 100% sure, if I'm honest. Matt. I'd have to check with my colleagues on that. I think that some of the borders opened, right, which I think gave the ability for business travel to start going again. And I think that we saw more people from a summer perspective want to get around, let's call it that, right? So my perception in Central and South America is the summer months and the ability to come out of the country really just drove up those hours. If you look at somewhere like in the US, like Florida, for example, we certainly saw the flight traffic going up in Florida over the summer months. And I think Central and South America probably had something to do with that as well because of the holiday traffic, let's call it that.
Okay, no, it's just interesting to me. I just, and I know there's a lot of money down there, and
yeah, there is. There's it's a hugely kind of underserved market. I think there's real opportunity in Central and South America for business aviation. Again, similar to Asia Pacific, right? The distances are vast, right? And the commonality between businesses in different countries is there to be able to justify the need for business aviation. And whilst I don't know the exact reason, I would suggest that having the ability to just travel around different countries in the safety of a business aviation flight rather than commercial enabled flight hours to push up in that part of the world over Q3.
Well, you also got big helicopter flights in Rio
Yes.
and places like that.
Yes.
Moving on to Asia Pacific, obviously, as you mentioned earlier, it's a perfect place for aviation.
Yeah.
The distances involved, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is, ever since I've been covering this industry, it's been a horror story for business aviation, trying to book landing slots, trying to book parking slots, all of that. Is it getting better in Asia Pacific, or is it about the same, getting worse? Where do we stand right now?
I think it's about the same, Matt. I think that if you look, a year or two ago, 3 or 4 years ago, there are challenges, particularly in somewhere like China. All right, China is a controlled airspace, as we all know, so you have to get slots, and sometimes they can not be as efficient as you would expect. The infrastructure around other parts of Asia is challenging, right? There's definitely a will to be able to improve that, and I think over the last couple of years we've seen an improvement. COVID has put that on hold. Right? There are plans, I'm sure, to be able to see a lot more freedom of movement and a lot more of a regular infrastructure amongst the region. But there's been no real movement this year, right? So that's something that is going to challenge us going into 21 and 22. And again, there's no quick answer, right? There is no quick answer. It's just going to take time and build it up.
Okay. Mark, finally, I try to always end these shows on a bright note. It's Christmas time. We all want to be happy. It's difficult. It's been a really tough year for not just the aviation industry, but for everybody who suffered from the COVID and everything else. Is there anything positive for business aviation that we can look forward to, or that has come out of this year, or anything like that?
I believe, Matt, that there is positivity. And I would say that if you look at where we were in the second half of February, March, April, and then going into May, there has been a huge improvement in activity, in flight activity. And I certainly see that will, although it may be a quarter down, as I was saying earlier, I certainly think that if you put it into perspective, where 75% was down, then I think that's positive. I think that new people have been attracted to this marketplace because of the lack of commercial option, and the commercial aviation sector is going to take a long time to recover. And on the back of that, if business aviation can get its act together, get the perception right, not get too greedy to try and pull back some of the, let's call it, losses that we've seen this year, we'll attract those people into business aviation. They'll become regular users and they'll become owners. And I think that's hugely positive. The vaccine is, are positive for us all. We need borders to open. As soon as the borders start to open, I believe that businesses will start moving again, and business aviation has the opportunity to be at the front of that. And if we do it right, and we market ourselves right, and we treat our customers right, then we have a huge opportunity to have a positive 2021 and beyond.
Mark Winzar, Senior Vice President for Business Development, and for every place in the world except the Americas, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, at Jet Support Services, or JSSI. Thanks for joining me in conversation.
Matt, it's an absolute pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm sure that you're looking forward to a nice quiet evening. And my day's just getting started. So it's a great way to start the day. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.